Fellow Guyanese, this evening I want to address a few issues. Uh, I wouldn't say issues, but a few topics that are important to our country and important to national life. One will be, and this is as a result of tremendous feedback from the public. I believe it is necessary for any functioning democracy to have not only an executive that adheres to the tenets of democracy and the rule of law, fairness, equity, and justice, but to have the other two arms of government, the judiciary and the legislature, also abiding by principles that would not only reinforce its independence, but would reinforce their commitment to the rule of law and to democracy. I am also of the firm belief that not only have all the electoral missions in Guyana found their elections in 2025 to be free and fair, but they were very complementary in the management of our elections. There are some issues that I wish to address, however, in this short discourse this evening. The third issue I want to further update the population on, because I've been consistently doing this, is how Guyana continues to be a global leader and a country whose public policy positions on the issue of cost of living has been highly regarded in the region and in the international community. It is important for us to understand these three issues. Now, one of the most recent observation report from our elections is the EU Election Observation Mission report, final report. Now, it is important in report writing for us to understand who is writing the reports and who is influencing the reports. And I believe that whilst all these reports point to the positive nature of the elections, I believe the time has come where we must get these missions, like the EU in this case, to adhere to international best practices in the hiring of local staff. If you go through some of the staff that were hired in this process by the EU, their own staff, that influenced the outcome of the report, you would have to question those persons' independence because they're associated with or are in association with persons who would have expressed partisan positions on many issues. The EU has always been an important part of elections observation in Guyana. And as president, I invited and welcomed European Union observation mission in Guyana. And when I received the EU final report sometime this afternoon, I went through the report to look at some of the comments and the challenges and everything that would have been raised in that report. It's important to note that the report points to the fact that the elections were peaceful, well run, and well run. That was how they described election day. Elections were peaceful, calm, and orderly. Voting, counting, and tabulation were administered efficiently and professionally. Polling staff performed well. So what are the important elements of the election? Before the elections, the preparation for the elections, how elections is managed on elections day, and the way in which the results are reported. So on election day, the mission basically said that the GCOM staff and mechanism was professional and efficient. The voting, counting, and tabulation, three of the most important components of a free and fair elections, were efficient and professional. That is to say, free from influence, free from bias, and demonstrated, those figures would have demonstrated the will of the people. Additionally, the report pointed out to the fact that women represented 87% of elections day staff and 81% of presiding officers. So we see the level of women participation in the electoral process on elections day as staff of GCOM. Secondly is the legal and procedural aspects of the election. The report points to improved transparency and improved legal and procedural reforms. The 2022 electoral reforms consolidated laws and introduced over 100 technical improvements. Notable were new transparent measures, which included real-time online publication of statement of polls, SOPs, immediately upon receipt by returning officers. Board further pointed to the fact that there were tighter recount procedures and increased penalties for electoral offenses, because these new amendments also brought great clarity to electoral offenses and the penalties that were associated with those offenses, that are associated with those offenses. The third aspect was the efficient election administration. How efficiently were the elections administered by GCOM Secretariat? Logistical operations were well executed. Regional staging areas, air, river, transport. Poll workers' training were assessed as comprehensive and professional. The voter information campaign improved with multimedia, hotline, and polling station search tool. So from an election efficiency point of view, that's the efficient administration of the elections by the Secretariat, again, pointed to marked improvement and efficiency. The inclusiveness of the candidate lists and the registration process, again, no challenge with that. This is pre-elections. Indigenous engagement, indigenous leaders were highlighted as contributing positively to the campaign. Observers and party agents were widely accredited, which means that there was wide accreditation. All political parties were accredited and present at polling stations. International and domestic observers deployed effectively That's what the report says. Now, the report also points to deep political polarization and low trust in institutions. Now, the same report points to the fact of an election institution, GCOM, that has efficiently, effectively, and transparently conducted the 2025 polls. But as a result of the scar from 2020, the scar, the mistrust, the derailing of systems, the erosion of systems in the 2020 elections, there was mistrust from that era, from what took place by staff of GCOM in collusion with political parties. However, the report points to the marked improvement and efficiency and transparency of the 2025 polls. Now, the reports speak about uneven playing field and undue advantage by incumbency, which I find ridiculous, to say the least. First of all, this comment is not based on any facts. It is based primarily on complaints by political participants in the elections and their affiliates. We made it very clear that in any system, there are disadvantages to incumbency and advantages to incumbency. If an incoming government performed badly, did not fulfill its manifesto, then they are faced with the disadvantage of their poor performance. If they had to manage, like we did, in a period of COVID, in 2 national floods, in a period where the world had its highest food prices, highest transportation costs, in an environment in which active participation to buy votes by a political party, and by the way, this is a nationally recognized fact, and nowhere in the report did they mention this. So incumbency comes with positive and negative. But because of the performance of the People's Progressive Party civic government, we delivered on all our commitment. We had schools, we had hospitals, we had health centers, we had roads to be opened throughout the period, to be commissioned. That's not an incumbency advantage. That is a commitment that the government made in its manifesto of 2020 to 2025 that the incumbent would have delivered on. And the incumbent has a duty and responsibility like any other country in the European Union. In the European Union, governments campaign on their delivery. Government campaign on their results. And these hospitals, these schools, these roads, the subsidy to our rice farmers, they were all results of the People's Progressive Party civic government? Is the report saying that incumbency, as part of incumbency, must not include campaigning and celebrating the successes of the government? What nonsense is that? The government has a responsibility to highlight and celebrate its accomplishments and its results. Now, new or expanded social programs roll out near elections. How is that an uneven playing field? We always had a social agenda based on the budget. This report lacks analysis. Because if they went back to the 2025 budget and the 2024 budget and our manifesto, they will see that every single one of the social program was alluded to. That we made commitments that we kept and surpassed. And as president, I made it clear that as we surpass commitment and based on revenue projection, that we are going to give back more to the people. That is not an incumbency advantage. That is delivering. So the analytical aspect of this statement points to the inexperience and points to the fact that it has no basis in the reality. And then personalized calls to cash grant beneficiaries. It is a fact that persons receive calls from all political parties. Not only the incumbent, all political parties. This is not an incumbency problem. We have a responsibility to speak about our success. What kind of system will deny an incumbent to celebrate its success, speak about its success, to use its great management of the economy and added revenue to expand social programs? Those were our commitment. If you went back to our manifesto of 2020 and the budget, you would see that those are commitments that we made. So I just wanted to make that very clear. That I find that statement objectionable. Insufficient regulation of campaign finance. As we said, the process of enhancing the laws, the process of modernizing the laws for elections, and advancing these laws would form part of the constitutional reform that is ongoing. Long before the elections, when we met with the European Union, the head of the mission, I met with them. I made it very clear that whilst we have made advances, there's still a number of areas that must be addressed, and we are hoping that in the Constitutional Reform Commission and through their consultation process, that these laws would also evolve. Made it very clear. Nowhere in the report point to the fact that there is an ongoing constitutional reform process. Nowhere. Now, media bias. And every time when you look at the report only sought to identify media biases by state-owned and private media heavily favor the ruling party. We have statistics to show that there are many private media entities that were 80% negative against the People's Progressive Party Civic. Some 90% negative. So it is not favoring the ruling party. There's no stats that I can point to in the report. But we have had independent analysis throughout the campaign that showed us balance, negative and positive. But this report only sought to highlight the ruling party as being favored for positive comments. And let me be very clear. The People's Progressive Party Civic, we paid for our ads, we paid for all our political material. There is no mention about the misuse of social media by known political parties and operatives against the ruling party. The report skillfully avoided that. Voters list concern. We know the reports speak about mechanism to remove deceased persons. There is a mechanism. There is a mechanism to remove deceased persons from the list. But the report pointed to the fact that elections were free and fair, which would have meant that the only persons who voted were persons who were registered to vote. So the fact is that whilst you have a list of 757,000 plus persons, look at the numbers that actually voted. The report should have mentioned that the court would have already ruled on this list, the applicability of the list, how persons can be removed from the list. There is a court ruling on this. That should have been included as a note. That should have been included as an important note in this report. Now, I agree when the report said also that persons living with disability, 59% of polling stations lack independent access. That is something we have to work on. We have to work to ensure that we make it easier for persons living with disability to exercise their franchise. And part of the new building code is to ensure that all our public facilities are equipped to support persons living with disability. So I want to say that as a government, there is no other government in the history of this country that embraces democracy, that embraces the rule of law, that embraces free and fair election like the People's Progressive Party Civic. And we welcome every suggestion. As I have said, the constitutional reform commission and this period would help us to further update our laws. And this was said to the European Union. We embrace the fact that this is evolving. We embrace the fact on people living with disability. But I've highlighted some areas in the report that are subjective, partisan, and completely biased, and cannot, by the lowest benchmark, be viewed as fair and balanced. So I wanted to once again thank the EU Election Observation Mission for their work, to thank them for being part of our elections, and to let the EU know that the People's Progressive Party civic government will always value their participation, but that, like any entity, they too must reevaluate based on some of the facts that I've highlighted. They must reevaluate where some narrative comes from, so that they can improve in presenting the facts and in presenting the completeness of its report. We look forward to continuing our work with the European Union and the Electoral Observation Commission as we work towards building stronger and more resilient electoral system here in Guyana, as we want to see all across the world. The other issue I wish to address is one that can seriously harm the work of the Guyana Revenue Authority and the Guyana Revenue Authority ability to collect taxes. It's a ruling that was so flawed that it exposes our taxation system to criminality and fraud. For a matter of fact, the ruling of Gino Prasad is viewed by many professionals as one that can incentivize the falsification of documents. There is something that is called post-clearance. There is something in post-clearance that inherently deals with the verification of values and the ability of the Revenue Authority after verification to apply the right taxes. However, I am pleased and the government welcomes the recent and highly consequential decision delivered on the 17th of November 2025 by Madam Justice Roxanne George in the matter of Janjen Yu and Guyana Revenue Authority. Justice George's ruling brings clarity to an area of significant public importance. The authority of the Guyana Revenue Authority to conduct post-clearance assessments of imported consignments. Her judgment is compelling, meticulously reasoned, intellectually rigorous, and firmly rooted. Indeed, it is upholding the rule of law. In both statutory interpretation and the practical necessities of modern customs administration. It stands as an exemplar of judicious thoroughness, demonstrating a deep understanding of the customs framework, the evolution of trade facilitation practices, and the responsibilities of a revenue authority charged with safeguarding the state's fiscal interests. Post-clearance audits and assessments are by no means novel. For decades, these mechanisms have been integral to the customs architecture. Historically, such functions were executed through the Inspections Department of the former Customs and Excise Department, now subsumed within the GRA. As international trade has expanded and as the global community has moved decisively towards streamlined custom clearance, custom administrations worldwide have strengthened post-clearance controls. The GRA has acted in step with global norms, enhancing its capacity to verify the accuracy of declaration after goods have passed the port of entry, an approach endorsed by the World Customs Organization and now authoritatively affirmed by Justice George's decision. Her ruling brings coherence to the law and protects the revenue of our country. This welcome clarity stands in stark contrast to the earlier ruling by Justice Gino Prasad, a decision that has confounded many observers and which the Guyana Revenue Authority regards as fundamentally flawed in law. That ruling, now slated for appeal by the GRA, has been widely criticized as perverse, internally inconsistent, and disconnected from both established custom practice and the evident intention of the Custom Act 8201. Many Guyanese remain baffled by how such a conclusion could have been drawn, especially in circumstances where the GRA had contended that the importation under scrutiny involved falsified declarations relating to a luxury motor vehicle. If Justice Prasad's decision is permitted to stand, its implications will be profoundly damaging. It would effectively erect a judicial barrier preventing the GRA from recovering taxes rightfully owed to the state once goods had been cleared. No matter how regardless of how falsified, regardless of the level of falsification, regardless of what falsification is discovered thereafter, his ruling would bar the state from its rightful revenue. Such an outcome is wholly inconceivable in a lawful and orderly revenue system. It would render the customs administration toothless, incentivize dishonest declarations, and deprive the state of significant revenue. Justice George's ruling restores rationality to the law. It reaffirms the post-clearance assessments are not only lawful, but essential to protect the public purse. The government welcomes our clear, authoritative, and well-grounded judgment, which reestablishes coherence in customs jurisprudence and ensures that the GRA can continue fulfilling its mandate without artificially or without artificial or ill-conceived constraints. The post-clearance mechanism is a mechanism for the ease of trade, the ease of doing business. But it comes with a system of verification. And in this case, the evidence is glaring and clear that documents